Hey everyone, I'm rather incoherent, and today we're going to be talking about Parallel Skids. I just finished using him to alpha test the Bloodborne fan campaign, and this isn't quite the deck I used there. That deck finished with 64 experience, which is tremendously higher than this list and not necessarily attainable in most campaigns. Additionally, it didn't run either of these weapons. I was given multiple story asset weapons and ran them instead. However, the story asset weapons were all basically just better machete, just like the Switchblade, and this 47 experience is doing most of the same stuff that 64 experience deck would have. The experience after this point really is just overkill, so this is a much more broadly applicable deck than what I was running. And in addition, I also wasn't even running Leo in that deck because I wanted to try out specific story assets that came with the campaign and had ally slots on them. But this is very easy to compare to, say, Dirty Fighting Skids or Big Money Tony. Like, I've seen these sets of cards, I know what the changes look like in a normal campaign, so let's talk about how Parallel Skids does. He's so much better than normal Skids, it's actually insane. I want to talk about his level 0 deck extensively in a little bit, because how he does at level 0 is really important. At the end of a campaign, he's super consistently getting out Black Fan, Haste, Leo, Dirty Fighting Geass, Hard Knocks, Well Connected. He's gambling for ungodly amounts of money constantly. I think the last 3 scenarios, they all ended with over 40 resources. Parallel Skids is hands down the best character at enabling big money. I view his weakness as that he's not the best at using it, and that his level 0 deck is really weak for the same reasons that he's not the best. If you want to make a big money fighter, Tony does it way better. If you want to make a big money clover, Trish does it way better. If you want to make a big money all-rounder or a dirty fighting centric character, Finn is way better than Skids. No matter what you're looking at, the ability to capitalize on big money is lower in Skids than in its competitors. But Skids also runs a 20-card deck with a far more consistent economy than anyone else, and he gets to be playing his big money deck for a much larger percentage of both the campaign and a given scenario. And that helps tremendously. The big question you end up having when it comes to how good is Parallel Skids is how long does it take him? I said in my tier list not too long ago, being consistent towards a level 0 lucky is worthless. Until you have like a Black Fan in the deck, until you're consistently working towards something that's actually meaningful, this 20-card deck isn't even an upside, it's just a thing. But in this final deck, how does it play? You have more money than God, you can trip anyone, you can pass any Mythos test. How high are you going to be swinging? That's a really important thing. Well, you're looking at 3, nothing here, 4, 5, 6. I can bump that to 8 after a dodge, which I will be doing every time. I can Hard Knocks to 9 twice, 10 once, well connected to 1,000,000 multiple times on any test in a given turn. Skids can just really effectively kill people. Like, once you're dirty fighting, once you've evaded an enemy and you're swinging at 8 for 2 5 times in a turn, that's just killing anything. This is using dirty fighting incredibly well, and it's not as efficient in terms of action economy as a Finn or a Tony would be, but it's still very, very good. It's more than good enough to kill everything. It's still getting that well connected to break through any Mythos check or any scenario test. It's a really, really strong deck. And I think that even though this isn't quite as good at capitalizing on the big money stuff as those other good rogues are, it still gets it online so much faster and so much more reliably that he's actually a better big money character than any of them. Trish and Tony still get more out of big money than other builds, same with Finn in my opinion. But Parallel Skids isn't just getting more out of big money, he excels at big money. So let's go talk about the level 1 deck that I was playing. Counting down to the starter deck, you can see its main weapon here is going to be the Thompson because +2 fist is a godsend. The Malzer's not as good, but it's the best second choice you have, and you will need a backup weapon if your job is main fighter. The plan here is largely use the Thompson, kill people, throw it at it, get it back with scrounge for supplies, and then the second time you get it, you should have drawn far enough into your deck to hit it with Contraband 2, and hopefully 15 bullets on this thing will get you through a scenario. You have the Malzer for a backup weapon, you have Hard Knocks to buy success because God, your stat line really does suck. You have Backstab for a 3 damage burst, you have a bunch of skills, and I haven't really mentioned it, I need to talk about this extensively in a little bit, but skills and Parallel Skids are insane. But how does this deck perform? In a playtest I did of some other scenarios with Parallel Skids off the channel, I found that I was reliably getting like immediately 45 Thompson to play, doing my job, and then getting it back with Contraband if I didn't contraband it the first turn I played it anyway. I think this deck actually does its job as a Scenario 1 fighter perfectly fine, and I was astounded by that. I thought this was some whack job dream of mine and the deck wouldn't actually work. I was like, scrounge for supplies, Contraband, we're deep in the copium, aren't we? And no, this deck just works, it's just good at its job, and that's really weird to me. Because a 3-fist fighter being good at their job because of Contraband sounds like I am off my rocker, but it just actually works. So I think the level 0 fighter, while it's not exceptional, don't get me wrong, this isn't Tony. I'm not saying this is a top tier fighter, but it is a fighter that successfully fights for their team. And that's more than I would expect out of a vanilla Skids. And then it grows up into this monster. It gets to 20 resources for Black Fan very fast, more specifically 15. 20 is nice, 15 for the extra action is where you actually have to live. It makes money very quickly. The coolest part about Parallel Skids is using his ability inventively. Gios seems like a really bad card in Parallel Skids because you want all these skills to gamble with. You're essentially turning foot icons and question marks into economy, and in addition, manual dex becomes fast draw 2, nimble is fast shortcut, possibly multiple. Quick thinking can give you an action any lightning bolt window in the game. If you find yourself in a situation where well connected is going to make you invincible and you don't need to use in the Mythos phase, you can throw Savant at this to just turn it into a fast emergency cache. The ability to gamble and get weird value out of all these skills is really, really good. And the crazy thing is that Gios only matters for committing during your turns. Because this is a lightning bolt window, you can do it right before your turn, right after your turn, or the most interesting one, during the Luke Robinson timing window. By that I mean the action phase that happens right after enemies engage. Enemies engage, then there's a player action window, then they attack. So you can gamble after you get engaged, use quick thinking, get through the test high enough to pass. That's not gonna be hard. You have hard knocks, you have well connected, you have other skills you can contribute. Get in action immediately, then you dodge the guy to evade him so you don't get hit. You dirty fight him, you knuckle dust him immediately. You might have just killed the guy. You might have just not gotten hit and dealt some damage. Quick thinking, and specifically Parallel Skids, is really, really good. There is something I do want to mention though. I don't think this deck is necessarily much better than it would be without Underworld Support. This is sort of fake consistency, right? Like if I were to have a 25 card deck, let's talk about some cards I could add. 2 copies of Easy Mark, an emergency cache level 2, a manual dex level 2, and a lucky level 3. Now that does cost more experience, but the 5 cards I just added to the deck all drew cards. So I'm not actually more consistent by lowering my deck size. What I'm really doing is lowering the amount of experience in the deck, and I do think that's still very valuable. I think that you don't need to do Underworld Support if there was something you wanted really consistently. For instance, if you really wanted to do 2 copies of Quick Thinking, or 2 copies of Manual Dex, or 2 copies of Nimble, whatever, I think you can still run this as a 25 card deck, and it has almost the same level of consistency. The big thing this does is it just allows you to have unparalleled consistency at getting that Black Fan online quickly. Before I move on, one thing that Underworld Support actually takes away from the deck that's not really obvious is the second copy of Lucky. I don't think you want to have like 6 copies of Lucky. I think that's very silly. However, having a second copy of Lucky is really nice because one thing this deck does a lot is testing at +2. Its numbers aren't really that high. You can buy success with Hard Knocks, and you can use Hard Knocks, the upgraded version, when you're gambling. You oftentimes find yourself gambling at 3-1 or 4-2, where you're just up 2, swinging at +2 with whatever weapon you have against an enemy. And by having a Lucky in your hand, you're able to say, it's okay to not invest more resources. I can just go up 2 with my Hard Knocks, and then if I fail, I'll Lucky. And you can do that most of the time you'll succeed. You get to do it over and over and over again and get a tremendous amount of value, not out of playing Lucky, but having Lucky in your hand. And that's why I want the second copy of Lucky, to get even more value out of it in that way. If I made this a 25 card deck, I would immediately add 2 more Easy Marks, another Lucky, another Manual Dex. I think those are actually the best cards in the deck for not reducing its consistency while making it a stronger deck. But then, very directly, the deck costs 5 more experience. That's the reason I like Underworld Support. With Underworld Support, you get this core set of cards online faster than anything else. I feel like I've kind of talked circles around Parallel Skids, right? I've talked a lot about what he does, and not really mentioned like how well he does it. He's really good. I don't want to call him Tony, but like he's kind of just Tony. And it grosses me out to say that about Skids. Like, yeah, his fist is 2 lower, and that's a really big deal. But I'm punching at fucking 8, man. 3 base, 4 from Black Fan, 5 from Lonnie, 6 from Gios, 2 more, so 8 from Dirty Fighting. You know what Tony punches at? It's 8. He doesn't use Dirty Fighting. It's the same number. So no, I don't get an extra action to fight like Tony, but I basically get every action Tony uses playing Hot Streak back by not playing those hot streaks, right? This deck is not that far off of a Tony, but the level 0 deck is a world away from Tony. On turns 1 through 3, this deck is substantially behind Tony because when you're not fully set up, you're looking at the 3-fist fighter. Tony can just like punch your ghoul out if he needs to. Skids can't. At least not before he sets up. Eventually, Skids does have 4 actions and 6 fists, and he'll punch a ghoul out, but not at the start. So at the end of scenarios, like even at the end of like scenario 4, I think this Parallel Skids deck is on par with Tony Morgan. It's just the rest of the game that he's not Tony Morgan, especially in the earlier scenarios. But he's really, really good. I was incredibly pleasantly surprised by just how good Parallel Skids is. Dirty fighting to close the gap with Tony and then using a 20-card deck to get there as fast as possible. Like, being worse than Tony Morgan is not a bad thing. I think there is only one character in the game that isn't worse than Tony Morgan. So if Skids gets anywhere close, that's climbing into A+. Parallel Skids did really, really well. He's very fun. Yes, I did autofill watch this with a 3 gamble on both watch this and my ability multiple times, once at the start of the scenario when I only had 6 resources and 2 other cards in my hand. So yes, there can be like catastrophic failures on Skids. This ability, especially if you play greedily with watch this, is sometimes going to backfire horrifically, and fundamentally, since your gambling is going to be against the Chaos Bag, this character doesn't really work on higher difficulties. However, in Standard, this is very nearly Tony Morgan, and I'm so happy with Parallel Skids. He did great. Anyways, I'm Rather Coherent. Hope you enjoyed hearing me talk about Parallel Skids. And if you did, then like, comment, subscribe, all that stuff really helps help the channel grow. And I'll see you in the next one.